Hello. This video is for Music 110, and it is to demonstrate how to get the MIDI file that is linked in the discussion, the discussion assignment for this week. How to get that MIDI file into Studio One, create new MIDI tracks from that MIDI file, and then get those MIDI tracks to make sounds. So I'm going to take you through that whole process, and hopefully this will help you get started on just getting some sounds out of there and get you a sense of the ways in which you can experiment with the overall orchestration of this song. Okay, so to start off, let's go over to Studio One, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new song. So I'm just going to, let's go back. I wanted to start a new song. All right. I'm going to just start a brand new song, and that's going to give me what you guys are probably familiar with right now. So this is like a totally blank slate. No tracks, no nothing. What I'm going to do next is I have downloaded the radical reorchestration assignment into my downloads folder, and this MIDI file has been unzipped. And when I drag it in, you'll notice that the one MIDI file automatically separates out into multiple MIDI tracks when I've dragged it over onto Studio One. So I'm just going to drag and drop. Great. So now I'm back over in Studio One, and I can see here that I have all this MIDI information that is broken up into a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tracks, 10 individual tracks. Awesome. So now if I press play, I don't hear anything. If I go over to my console view, I see my master channel, my master fader. Nothing is coming out of there, and I also noticed that I don't really have any tracks here to mix either. Okay, so what this is telling us, is that we haven't assigned any instruments, any virtual instruments, to these MIDI tracks. So right now, all that Studio One is doing is it's just going through and it's playing a bunch of on and off messages for these MIDI notes, but it's not communicating those on and off messages to any sound bank. We haven't assigned them yet. Now, all of these tracks have these names. These names come from the MIDI, from the MIDI session from which these were derived. But yeah, none of these. But there's no. This is just so. It's just like this track was called French horns. This track was called grand piano. This track was called fingered bass. But the MIDI file, the file that I dragged and dropped in here, does not have the information say that. Well, what does a fingered bass sound like? It just says the MIDI track that this was titled fingered bass. So now each of these we need to give. We need to assign to a instrument, to a sound bank, to a virtual instrument. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to drag and drop presence instruments onto each track. Now, before you do that, I am unaware of a way in which you can individually name your presence instruments. There might be a way to do it. If anyone figures one out, tell me. But as far as I know, you cannot rename the instrument itself, the presence instrument. So what can be annoying with that is that, right, we're going to have 10 different instruments, and when we're going to be looking at them in our window, our instrument window, they're just going to be all named presence 1 through 10. So that's kind of annoying. I'd like to be able to know, to like look and see immediately what instrument it is that I'm messing with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the order in which I drag and drop these presence instruments onto the MIDI tracks um is going to be the order of the track order. So the track order is one for French horn, 2 for grand piano, etc. And I'm going to drag them in that order. So the first presence instrument that I'm going to drag over is over track number 1. Okay. Now, now notice that when I drag a presence instrument over track number 2, the grand piano track. Okay, so now I've got presence and then presence 2. And as I continue, drag the next time I drag a presence instrument over, I'll drag it over track number 3. Now, presence instrument number 3 will align with track number 3. So now when I'm changing these instruments over here and switching between my different presence instruments, it aligns with my track numbers, and that way I can keep track of which instrument I'm working on when I'm going back and forth between these two menus. All right, so I've dragged 3 presence instruments over. For you, I would just continue the process until you've dragged over all 10 tracks, and you'll end up with 10 different presence instruments that you can flip between when you open up your instrument window. I've just done the first 3 tracks for this demonstration. Okay, so right now this first track is French horns. And if let's get a loop going on. Let's see here. Okay, so I just made a select. So what I'm doing is, notice that I just kind of highlighted where I saw some MIDI notes in this first MIDI track, because I want to just loop this so I can just get some sounds coming out. And you'll notice that there's a bunch of space in here where the French horns aren't playing anything. So I'm just going to loop the general area where they're playing. And I'm going to press play. All right. Now, notice that now that I've dragged these presence instruments over onto these 3 MIDI tracks, I'm getting MIDI output here. So by dragging these presence instruments over, Studio One is now outputting MIDI to a presence instrument. But we still are not getting any sound. And the issue is that none of these instruments have sound banks attached to them. So here I am on this first presence instrument, French horns, and I can see that these higher notes are being played, but I'm not getting any sound out. In fact, if I test any of these notes with my mouse here, I'm not getting any sound out. So what I need to do is make sure that a sound bank is loaded. When I dragged this MIDI file in, this list is all of the tracks that were brought in, but none of these are really instruments as far as that Studio One can turn into sound. So I'm going to open up the artist instruments, and this is supposed to be French horns. So I'm going to go down to winds and brass, and let's select French horn section. All right. Great. So now I've selected that and I've loaded my French horn section, and I'm still not hearing anything. So and if I try playing, there we go. I hear that, but I'm not hearing these higher notes. So the notes are being played way up high here, but I'm not hearing anything play. Now, here is the issue. Notice, see up top here, this like gray line that goes over the top of the keyboard? Watch this. So I'm just going to use my mouse to click on some keys. So this high note here at the very top of the gray line plays. This A flat does not make a sound. If I go, same thing if I go down here below, and we can assume that I bet you this G will play. All right. So right now, I have a bunch of MIDI information that's playing on the keyboard above the range of this particular MIDI, of this particular sound bank. Okay, so what can I do about that? Well, one is I could choose a different sound bank, one that that isn't just in this small range, doesn't just have sounds for this range of the keyboard, but for the entire keyboard. So, for example, let's try something that's just in the keyboard section. Okay, so you'll notice that now this Funkmaster keyboard has sounds for the entire range of the keyboard, and that means that that these notes, these high French horn notes that were out of the range of the previous instrument, are now within range. But let's say I really want to have that French horn sound. I'm curious what this would sound like with that French horn sound. So I'm going to I'm going to reload the French horn section here, and I'm going to go into my MIDI editing window, and I'm going to find these notes. And what I need to do is move these notes down into the range. So, so there are a couple ways I can do. Really, what I'm going to do is I want to move these notes down an octave. So, right now the notes are. Let's see. There we go. It's 3 different notes. So, it's that E, it's that A, and then a D sharp there. So it's 3 notes, and I just kind of clicked on them to see what they were. It told me over here, like it'll tell you, for instance, let me show you again one more time. So I select this. Tells me over here, this is an E5. So it's the 5th E on the keyboard, going up the keyboard. Here, this is going to tell me it's an A5. And I want to remember that, because I'm going to try to move these notes down so that they're the same pitch, but in a lower octave. So if I move these down. Now I've moved them down to within the range, or at least some of them are. But that A is still not in the range, so I'm gonna move them down 2 octaves. Okay. So I've moved them down. Notice that the pitch again. I started on an E5. Now it's an E3. So I've moved. It's still an E pitch. It's just moved down 3 octaves. Now if I play this, oh, we don't hear anything. That's interesting. Okay. So let's open up this presence instrument again. This is our French horn section. We press play. Okay. Okay. So great. What I'm not really sure why the volume on my French horn instrument was turned down, but it was. It seems like sometimes this happens when you're dragging MIDI files in. I'm going to turn this volume up. Huh, okay. All right, so it seems like perhaps there's some automation on the volume here. I'm not really sure why it keeps turning down whenever I press stop. Let me see here. All right, so I did have to take a little pause to figure this out, but I did. I figured it out. So you'll notice that the problem was that let me mute because I figured it out for the French horns. The problem was exactly this. So if I go to right now, I have let me load in. So this is grand piano. This is the track called grand piano. So I will load in a piano sound. Let's do grand piano. Okay, so I've loaded in a grand piano sound bank to my MIDI track 2, which is titled grand piano. And again, what I'm going to do is press play. And I can see these notes. I can see over here that I've got MIDI input here. And I can see that notes are being played on this grand, and can see that the program is loaded for grand piano, and I can see that these notes are being played, but I'm not hearing anything. Over here on the right, I have this global volume parameter. If I bring this up, great. But as soon as I press stop, the volume goes straight back down again. Now, that made me think that, oh, well, perhaps there's some automation hidden in these MIDI tracks that I can change. So what I did is I clicked on the volume. I right-clicked on the volume so that I could edit the automation for this knob, for this volume knob. So, and if I go back over to my track view, what that did is it created a automation lane where I can put in some automation. So right now, the master volume is down to 0. But what if I brought this up to, what if I brought brought the master volume up. If I press play, still nothing. So if I go over here, even though I've changed the global volume automation, it doesn't seem to make any difference. As soon as I press stop, it just goes back down again. So I was thinking there's got to be some automation that is embedded in these MIDI tracks that was embedded by maybe some other program or something like that. I.e., Studio One has its way of understanding volume automation for the presence instrument, but perhaps there's some information in these MIDI files that that is from the program where they were originally arranged. So what I ended up doing is, and this is what you all are going to have to do for each of these tracks. It's actually pretty simple. I'm going to double click. I'm going to make sure that I'm back into, I can go into my MIDI editing window. I'm going to double click on this MIDI track. That opens this MIDI editing window. Now, I have my MIDI notes, but I also have this other information that can be, these other parameters that can be changed down below. So right now it's, I can see the different levels of velocity here, but there are other types of parameters that can be changed and automated, that can be written directly into this MIDI editing window. And it's not just these that are listed here below: velocity, note controller, etc. But if I press this ... add remove, this gives me this pop-up window. And over here, these are actually all of this. When these MIDI files were made, it created automation for all of these parameters over on the left here. And I'm not really sure why, but I'm not really sure why all of this information is coming with these MIDI files. But we can just remove the master gain automation from this MIDI track. So I'm just going to click remove. It's going to say, do you really want to remove this parameter from all parts? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to close. Now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to press play. And my problem is solved. Every time I press stop and press play, and let me just just to demonstrate this, if I open up my instruments again, remember before, every time I pressed stop, the volume over here on the left would just go down to 0. All right, so unfortunately you're going to also have to do this for every track individually. So for instance, if I open up the fingered bass and I press play, notice if I bring the volume up, as soon as I press play, it should go back down. So again, all I have to do is open up the MIDI editor window on the fingered bass track by double clicking. I'm going to click here on this add remove thing down here. I'm just going to click on master gain, remove, yes, close the window. Let's return and check out this fingered bass part. Let's make sure that there's something loaded in. So let's give it a bass. Let's give it, I don't know. All right. I just threw in a random bass sound. All right. So now the volume should not be going down at the very beginning. It should just stay wherever I leave the volume knob. All right. So that's the fix. That's the go around. Again, when these MIDI files were created in another program, there is some information in there that seems to be interpreted by Studio One in kind of a weird way. So, in order to fix that, with each of these tracks, let's just do this one more time. Just I'm going to go through this one more time. So if you feel like, okay, I got it, I can figure this out, you can leave the video now. I'm going to go through it one more time just for clarity. Let's mute these. I'm going to set up my presence instrument for this section strings. I'm going to drag a presence instrument over the track. I'm going to drop it there. So this gives me a new presence instrument. I'm going to load a sound bank. This says for strings. I mean, I could really load anything, and I would encourage you guys to experiment. Let's throw a sitar on there. Why not? All right. So now I have the sitar loaded, and we should end up with the same problem that we had before, where as soon as I press play, the volume, the global volume should go down. Yeah. So notice how it immediately dropped down. All these notes are being played. If I bring it back up, and when I stop it, it just immediately goes down. But if I go into the MIDI editing window and I click on this ... button, which is going to add and remove automation, and I click on master gain and I remove, I say yes, I close. If I go back to this is my sitar. If I bring this up, the automation has been removed. You can tell it because it no longer has like a green little button there. If I press play, great. So this should get you guys going. Remember, you have to load a presence instrument onto each individual MIDI track. You have to remove the automation from each MIDI track in the MIDI editing window. Once you've done that, I encourage you to just go wild. I think just from hearing this, you can probably the surprise has been revealed what song this is. But have fun with this. Try out all sorts of weird instruments. Use percussion instead of grand piano. Like really mess around. Come up with some weird reorchestrations of this recognizable tune. And I look forward to hearing your reorchestrations this week. If you have any questions, as always, send me an email, and I'm happy to put these videos up or help you further. All right, have fun with this, and see you next time.